Years ago, when I was still a young mom, I became friends with a couple who lived a couple of doors down. The maintenance guy, C, and his wife. My daughters called him Carmel because it was close to his name and seemed to amuse them. Anyway, shortly after we met, Carmel's wife left him, and somehow I became his shoulder to cry on. He would tell me how he parked in front of the house where she was now living for 4 hours to give her roses despite her telling him not to contact her. No matter how much I told him he was never going to win her back by refusing to respect her requests, he kept on doing things like this. Eventually he gave up on wooing her back, I suppose, and we remained friendly, but I didn't see as much of him. I did ask him for a lift to go see my boyfriend, who was in the hospital. I didn't have a car, and it was a hot summer day, so I didn't really want to walk the 2-mile trek each way. He dropped me off, and after my visit, I walked home as I originally planned, arriving home in time for my ex to drop off my daughters, all 3 of whom were kindergarten age or younger. The following day, I was out of cigarettes. My youngest 2 were napping, and my 5-year-old was awake. I admittedly didn't use good judgment when I walked across the way to my neighbors to bum a cigarette, even if I could hear my daughters if they called out. I was gone 3 or 5 minutes. As soon as I got home, my daughter told me Carmel had called while I was gone. I called him to see what he needed. "Hey, yeah, how come you didn't call me to come get you yesterday?" he asked. I told him I didn't need a lift home, and after a minute or 2 of conversation, I hung up. As I did, my daughter said, "Mom, I don't know if you want to know, but I think you want to." I asked what she was talking about. When Carmel called yesterday, he said he likes to take off his clothes and play with himself and asked if I wanted to watch. Obviously, that was the end of my acquaintance with Carmel, but it was not the end of the story. I filed a police report, but they couldn't really take action because they said a crime had not been committed. I told the apartment manager, and he was fired. However, in the months that followed, my middle daughter started saying odd things when she woke up at night. She always awakened at night to go potty or get a drink in her semi-conscious state, and then always settled back to sleep instantly. But now said, Carmel talked to me at the window on several different occasions. I always went out to find if he was there, but I never saw anyone. I wondered if it was just her imagination even, but every time she said it, she told me that he said he would be her friend if she let him in, and it happened every time she said he was at the window. It was scary, but I felt confident enough. After all, I was always home at night and would do anything to protect my girls. These things never happened before midnight, and I was always up later than that. Then one night, I hired a babysitter while I went to a dance with my boyfriend. We got home around 10:30 or so, only to find the police at my apartment. An unidentified male had tried to convince the babysitter to open the door for him. She said he yelled at her when she wouldn't open the door, and that he had walked around the patio and started waggling his tongue at her through the window, so she called police. My oldest daughter told me that it was Carmel. So even after 2 police reports, it didn't end. The final incident was when I awakened to a loud pounding on my front door. I looked through the peephole, and it was a police officer. I invited her in, and she said they had received a phone call about a man looking into the windows of my apartment in my daughter's room. She said the caller had apparently startled him and he ran, but the caller was able to get a license plate number. "Do you know a man named—" and she spoke his real name. That was the last time he messed with my family, but it wasn't the last I heard of him. My boyfriend ran into him at a convenience store a few months later, and said Carmel acted like nothing had happened, and like we were all great friends. Some backstory before I begin. These events started when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, 2002 or 2003-ish, and ended during the fall of 2015. I'm a 21-year-old female living in Canada. RCMP equals Royal Canadian Mounted Police. When I was in elementary school, I was friends with a girl named Jessica. We had a group of 5 or 6 girls that we always played with. Jessica's parents were divorced, and I often went over to her dad's house after school because they had a trampoline and a slide. Her dad was a totally normal dude. His name was Richard, and he held a job as a pilot, which is definitely a job that requires mental stability. Jessica came over to my house as well, and her dad would always come pick her up after the play date, so he was familiar with where I lived. I think in 2nd or 3rd grade, Jessica moved away to live with her mom. I didn't fully understand what was going on as a child, and I still don't know what happened, but something had gone wrong with her father. We didn't hear much from Jessica, but around her birthday the following year, Richard invited our group of girls over for a surprise party. We arrived at the party, and were waiting for Jessica so that we could surprise her, but Jessica never showed up. We were just hanging out with her dad for a while. As a child, this didn't seem as weird to me as it does now. When our parents picked us up, we obviously told them about what had happened, and we didn't hang out with Jessica or Richard again. After that, some of the girls started receiving presents from Richard at their homes. I never received them, but my mother told me about it years later. The presents usually included cheap jewelry and notes. I have no idea what the notes said, but I'm not sure I want to. After this, Richard goes away. My mom later told me he was in a mental institution. Years go by. I completely forgot about the whole situation. Then, in the winter of 2013, I was out of town for a cheer competition. I was scrolling through Facebook one night, when all of a sudden a new group chat popped up with 5 girls from my elementary school. I hadn't kept in touch with any of them, so this was weird. The chat was about how they had received messages from Richard on Facebook. I checked the other folder of my Facebook messages, and sure enough, I had some too. I had a variety of strange messages that didn't make a lot of sense, including some strange poems. Many of the messages were descriptions of dreams he'd had about me. Though some of them were nonsense, others were understandable enough to come across as sexually and violently threatening. I don't feel comfortable sharing in the more explicit messages, but here are a couple of the shorter, less scary ones. Hi, little girl from not long ago. Pristine of pristineness. I want you. I want you. I want you. We're gonna have planets to go to someday, provided you don't melt them first. I'm so proud of you. Stay happy, and I haven't found a way to keep you all off my mind. I can't see the planets till I make you all mine. You're just so rough and oh, just so fine. As if I'm there, my love's for you. For you I share. It's so indefinite, for it's all about you, that I only care. Oh my goodness, you're all my whipping cream containers. I clicked on Richard's Facebook profile, and his whole profile was dedicated to us 5 girls. He didn't have any friends added, so clearly nobody had seen it. Unfortunately, we didn't have very good security settings on Facebook. He had saved dozens of photos of us, and then reposted them with nonsensical and inappropriate captions. The captions ranged from essays about his love for us, to a one-sentence caption that simply said, "She's so ugly." Here are some of the shorter ones. Emily, hopefully and not too soon, I'm gonna find out your YXX8511, and I'm gonna show up as a man that knocks on your front doorstep and bites your bottom lip off before you can say a word. Ciara, because my initial euphoria turns into sunken depression when I realize that there's nothing I can do about anything beside you, beside you're inside me, and I can't get you out of my mind. I love you so much. Melissa, can I paint your picture? And I want to lift you around to see how heavy you are, and well, go for a drive on Hollywood Drive with the windows rolled down so we can get a crystal clear view. Fucking give it up, like as if I'm gonna pretend I like it. Besides, you're just yanking on my strings, 'cause time after time it's always the same common denominator, which I noticed. How come you all pluck your eyebrows, but I do pretend? I have favorite things, but in reality I don't need them. And I'm a good liar because I have a criminal mind like yours. We were all 18 at the time and didn't know what to do. so our moms contacted the RCMP. They told us not to block Richard on Facebook, but to not reply to any of the messages that could be used as evidence. He continued to send us messages every single day, and we shared the screenshots with each other in the group chat and sent them off to the police. He had several different Facebook accounts that were all variations of his name, along with one randomly named Esteban. One of the girls got in touch with Jessica to find out if she still had contact with her father. She only saw him on supervised visits every once in a while. Overall, she was very embarrassed and apologized a lot. She was a super sweet girl, and obviously none of us were upset with her in any way. Eventually, Richard was charged with 5 counts of criminal harassment. He pled guilty and went to jail for around 5 months. When he got out, there was still a no-contact order in place, meaning that he could not contact any of us girls or come within a certain radius of our homes. He wasn't allowed to use the internet either. I'm not sure how all of this works, but this is what the constable handling the case told me. However, not surprisingly, he started contacting us on Facebook again, and he went back to jail for breaching his probation. It was the summer of 2015 when he got out again. I started receiving more messages. I immediately wrote the group chat to see if the other girls had gotten anything, but they hadn't. It was just me. I immediately contacted the police. It seems they had forgotten to include my name on the no-contact order. He knew not to contact the other girls, but thought it was still safe to come after me. This time things got worse. I had just started working in a new job, and being the idiot that I am, I had my workplace public on my profile. One day I came into work, and there was a package waiting for me. I was obviously confused because I never would order something to be delivered to my work. I opened it up with my managers, and there was weed inside along with a disc with encryption software on it. He had mailed me weed to my work. I knew immediately that it was him, and awkwardly explained the situation to my managers, who thought it was hilarious. The security in my office tower was alerted and given a photo of him. They began walking me to my bus stop after shifts. It was scary knowing that he knew where I worked. At this point I hadn't seen Richard in years, but it was clear that he was mentally unwell. I had absolutely no idea what he was capable of, or what his motives were. The RCMP didn't seem to take this case very seriously, and they moved very slowly, passing the case around to various officers. Meanwhile, I was terrified. I could hardly walk down my street at night without freaking out. Every time somebody knocked on my door while I was home alone, I would drop whatever I was doing and hide under the kitchen counters. I hadn't moved since I was a child, so it was very possible that he still remembered where I lived. The packages kept coming. I received more weed in several different forms, including cookies, what appeared to be cocaine, and a key to his apartment along with some miscellaneous items. I opened all the packages at the police station. One of the packages contained a USB stick with a bunch of audio recordings on them, but I decided it was better for me to not listen. The return address on the packages was a random P.O. box in another city that didn't even belong to Richard, and no fingerprints were found on the packages. During all of this, the Facebook messages remained constant. Luckily, in one of the messages he informed me that he had sent me the drugs and the key along with his home address. This confirmed that the packages were from him. He was charged again. I received a subpoena in the mail to appear as a witness in court. However, he once again pled guilty, and I never even got to go. I was actually a bit disappointed, as I thought seeing him in person would provide me with some sort of closure. He's still locked up somewhere as I'm writing this, but I still get scared walking at night, or when somebody knocks on the door. The police provided me with zero information on where he's being held or when he would be released. I feel like I'm just waiting for the day that he'll contact me again. It seems as if every time I think it's over, it's not. If I do hear from him again, I'll be sure to post an update. The situation could have been a lot worse. As far as I know, he didn't ever physically follow me around or anything. I strongly encourage you all to make sure your Facebook privacy settings are as private as possible. I love listening to scary stories, and I figured it's time to maybe share some of my own creepy encounters. A bit of a warning, this is going to be long. Throughout my life, I've experienced many unusual and often unpleasant situations. For privacy reasons, I don't want to give away too much information about myself, but I will say that I am a 20-year-old girl now living in Ireland, where I've lived for over 5 years. I grew up in a small Eastern European country, of which about 40% are Russian, and am of Russian descent. Even though almost everyone in my country spoke fluent Russian and much of the population had Russian relatives, ethnic tensions in the country were high. It wasn't uncommon for you to receive a lower salary or worse treatment in shops and other public places if the place was run by natives. It's because of this I believe I was singled out as a target in this particular story. That and my feeble appearance, as I've always been quite short and skinny. My neighborhood, like any other, consisted of many blocks of Soviet apartments, remnants of the USSR, rotting away but nevertheless housing hundreds of people. It was a good enough neighborhood, all things considered, and I would not have called my family particularly poor. However, the building we lived in was rather bleak. The hallway was always dark and stank of piss or sometimes other bodily excretions. The building was quite tall, and had an old creaky elevator which smelled no better than the hallway itself, and it often got stuck or broke. This was still more favorable than climbing the even darker sets of stairs, which often had homeless people sleeping on them, or groups of teenagers gathering to do drugs. The layout of the place is unimportant, however I believe this description will set the scene. After a year or two of living in this building, with few occurrences aside from stumbling upon the occasional stoner with a knife trying to rob me for drug money, or getting a drunk passed out in front of my apartment, I started to notice 2 native kids hanging around the neighborhood, a girl and a boy. At first, they never spoke to me, and I paid little mind to them. However, I would often notice them staring at me as I passed by, or from a distance as I played with other neighborhood kids. These kids were weird, to say the least. They spoke a very limited amount of Russian, and isolated themselves from everyone, just watching me. Despite them being very similar looking, nobody knew if they were related or just 2 weirdos living in my building who found each other, but I remember always assuming they were brother and sister. After a while of the not-so-casual staring, they began to harass me on my walk home, tease me, push me, and generally attempt to get on my nerves with what little Russian insults they knew. I had a rather thick skin, so this didn't really bother me too much. I would either completely ignore them or fight back with what I thought were rather witty comebacks, but these kids were relentless. I began to wonder why they decided to randomly pick on me, as I'd never said a word to them before and had never really paid them any significant amount of attention. But I decided to settle for the "they're just a bit weird" explanation. Regardless, it was all just teasing, right? Just kids being kids. One day on my walk home, the strange duo were on my heels as usual. The boy making some crude comments about my nationality and how I should go back home to Russia, as well as other unrelated insults, while the girl snorted and laughed her ass off. I did my best to ignore their behavior, not feeling in the mood to dignify them with a clever comeback this time. However, it became increasingly difficult, as in frustration the 2 suddenly became more aggressive. All the other times this went on, they would just give up and leave me alone after a while, walking in the other direction. But this time, to my surprise, they followed me into my building and into the poorly lit, stinky hallway. Still ignoring them, I pressed the button for the elevator, when I felt the boy roughly grab me from behind. I was in shock. The girl joined him, bending my arm in an incredibly uncomfortable position behind my back. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed at them, as they began attempting to drag me to the almost black staircase, telling me to shut the fuck up. I struggled, of course, not understanding what had gotten into these 2. I mean, I knew they were weird, but this was something else. This didn't feel like childhood bullies or kids being kids. I believe these 2 had something sinister on their minds. As I struggled against their grip, trying to break my way free and towards the elevator that now arrived onto the ground floor, A middle-aged woman walked into the hallway. A look of confusion at the sight before her on her face. She asked, "Is anyone going up?" Desperately, I breathed, "I am, please," reaching for the elevator, only to hear the guy snarl, "You're not going anywhere." To my surprise, despite the pure desperation in my voice, and the fact that I was fighting two seemingly older kids due to my size, trying to drag me away, this woman didn't offer any help. Didn't give out to the two kids. Didn't even ask what was going on. She just shrugged her shoulders and walked into the elevator. What was going through her head still makes me curious, but I'm assuming this was probably due to assuming this was nothing serious because of our age, or maybe her not wanting to get involved any more than she already had. After all, our neighborhood wasn't the safest. It was best to just stay out of trouble if you could. At this point, I became surged with adrenaline, partially from my desire to get into that elevator and away from these two, and partially from anger at her refusal to help me. It's amazing what the human body can do when faced with a potentially dangerous situation. Using all of my strength, I whipped around and slammed the boy into the wall behind me, immediately making them both let go of me. I could tell that the two of them were as shocked as I was at what I had just done. As I said, I was a small girl, but it felt as though someone else had possessed me in that moment, as if I wasn't even in control of my actions. All I knew was that I had to get away now. As soon as I was let go, I ran to the elevator and managed to make it inside before the door closed. The last thing I remember seeing before the door slammed shut and we took off was the girl's shocked expression as she stared at me, surprised of what I was capable of. The lady in the elevator didn't say a word to me, and I wish it could have ended there. A few days later, I was confident in my ability to defend myself against those two, and was pretty sure they wouldn't attempt to attack me again, or even go near me. My relief, however, was short-lived. A friend of mine knocked on my door at the usual time I would go out on a free day, asking me to hang out. I, of course, excitedly agreed, and as soon as I was ready, we headed out into the elevator. As previously mentioned, the elevator itself wasn't all that sturdy, and easily broke down, but that's not the only thing that made it unsafe. If you were a child and were taking the elevator alone, especially in a building as tall as ours where there were many floors, you never knew what the person that got on with you turned out to be, and what they could do to you, especially if the elevator got stuck. This wasn't something that happened often, of course, so that didn't prevent us from using it and taking the dreaded stairs. We got on without a worry in the world, and pressed the button for the ground floor. We began chatting about nothing in particular. About 4 floors down, the elevator stopped, letting on a burly middle-aged man. Just the sight of him was intimidating. He had a sunken face, long black greasy hair, a curly beard, and sweat stains under his arms. His belly was so big that it took up most of the room in the tiny elevator, pushing my friend and I into a corner. We fell silent. At first he said nothing, just stared at the two of us as the elevator doors closed. I could tell that much like myself, my friend had an uneasy feeling about him and what his intentions with us were. Then in a deep, hoarse voice, he says slowly and calmly, "You think you're so tough, don't you?" It was more of a statement than a question, and I could tell it was directed at me. Suddenly, he pressed the elevator stop button, screeching it to a halt, and reached out and grabbed me by the fringe. He pinned me against the wall of the elevator, still holding on to my fringe, and began to pull up. I could feel some strands of my hair ripping out of my skull as I was being lifted slightly. However, not enough for my feet to lose contact with the ground. I squealed in pain, and my friend watched in shock, cowering further into the corner, unable to do anything. "I can be tough too," he sneered in a slightly sarcastic tone. I began to try and make him let go of my hair, but to no avail. The more I moved, the more of my fringe ripped out, and the more painful it became. So I just stopped struggling and attempted to stand on my tippy toes as much as I could, to release the tension he had on my head. "You think it's so funny to hurt my son?" For a second I had no idea what he was on about, but then I realized. The boy had slammed against the wall in an attempt to get away, must have told his parents what had happened, most likely neglecting to include the fact that he had attacked me first. Or maybe he did, and more likely, his father just didn't give a shit. He didn't seem like a very reasonable man at the moment. I know what floor you live on, and if you ever touch my son again, I'll put a knife through your throat in this fucking elevator. Do you understand me? He hissed at me. Before I could respond, the elevator began to move again. Someone must have called it onto another floor. He narrowed his eyes at me and let go of my hair, standing back and acting as if nothing had happened. As we stopped and another person got on a few floors down, the rest of the ride was spent in silence. I don't know what was scarier, the fact that this clearly insane man was threatening my life, or the fact that his equally loopy son had stalked me without my knowledge to find out what floor I lived on, and what my routine was, just so he could get his psycho dad to threaten me. And for what? My friend and I tried to never speak about it again, but whenever I saw those two kids, they kept their distance as they have before, just grinning at me. I've been hooked on this sub since I came across it a few weeks ago. I finally had the time to post my story here. It's probably not as crazy as others, but it's still pretty damn scary. Backstory. I was a senior in high school, 2014, and female. I had just turned 17 3 months prior, due to starting kindergarten early because of my birthday and the state I lived in at the time. Point is, I was pretty young. My dad had just unexpectedly passed away a week before this incident. This Friday was my first day back at school, and yes, my mother made me come back to school less than a week after I found my dad dead of a heart attack. So I totally wasn't ready for it, more like forced to act normal. I do think this played a big part in my reaction. I went to Votech. For those who don't know, I had half of my day devoted to a specific trade, cutting my actual time in high school classes in half. After lunch, all the tech students would get on the buses to be driven to tech. I was one of the few who were allowed to drive to tech because I had a job that sometimes started at the end of my school day and was allowed to leave early to go to work. And now for the story. It's a semi-normal day, even though I just went through the most traumatic event of my life a week ago. Teachers were sent an email of what had happened with my dad. Fellow students ended up finding out as well. Everywhere I went in school, I was asked why I was even there. Was I okay? Did I need to go home, and all that sort of thing. I was pretty much emotionless after spending a whole week crying. I was just over it and wanted to get through the day. After lunch, I'd get in my car to head to tech. I enjoyed tech a lot. I was actually looking forward to it. Now, tech is less than 15 minutes away from my high school. Not a long trip at all. I'm down the road and someone in front of me stops to turn, and I notice their car behind me, an older Ford Taurus, swaying something out of the driver window. He's an old man alone. I assume he's just waving something with the music, and pay no mind. A little further down the road, someone else in front of me stops to turn. We're at a dead stop waiting for the other lane to clear, so the guy ahead can cross. I had my window down as it was a pretty nice day. Then I noticed the guy behind me was staring at me through my rear view window, pointing previous object at me, lunging it, and yelling out the window at me. "You fucking cunt, don't you know how to drive?" I'm instantly like, okay, this is pretty weird. I'm just waiting for this guy to turn. I know that I didn't do anything stupid driving previously. I was confused and roll my window up. My school is less than 3 minutes away at this point. I'm still being a little paranoid and looking into my rear view mirror at this guy heading down the road. I then see him take the object, that I still can't see well enough to figure out what it is, and take it across his throat as if he's slicing it, and then pointing it at me. He's also accelerating, riding my ass and then backing off. My heart starts racing, because I know this guy isn't joking at this point. I figured that once I turned into tech, he would keep on driving, just a crazy case of road rage. I'm still scared though. I turn into tech and pull forward into a spot. The guy whips in and parks directly behind me. I notice some other students in their car beside me getting their books together, and I signal to them to stay in their car. It gets what the fuck looks from them, and I mouth that I don't know and to lock the door. The crazy old guy then comes up to my window with a fucking knife. That's what he was waving out the window this whole time at me. A huge Swiss Army knife. I have no idea how I didn't notice that it was a knife. His face got so close to my window. His eyes were squinted and bloodshot. He had curly white hair with glasses. He seemed to be about 70 years old, but was a pretty bulky guy. He truly looked scary and pissed. He told me to open my door, and started trying to open my door when I shook my head no. He then takes the knife and scratches a big X on my window right where my face would be from his point of view. Then he pressed his hands against my window and pulled my window down a few inches. I had a Jeep with some pretty crappy window motors. I'm really freaking out now. The window was open about 2 to 3 inches due to my rain guards, but I was still scared. I took my seatbelt off and started backing away from the window, but didn't want to get out of my seat so this guy could chase me around the inside of my car. He then sticks the knife into my car, inches from my face. I can't roll the window back up. He's screaming that he's going to slit my throat like babies and children and their mothers in Vietnam, how I'm just a stupid little whore that needs to know her place, and other crazy deranged things like this. I'm truly scared now, and still backing away as far as I can in my seat from the knife, but in a way, after what I just went through, I just started not to care. In my mind, he wanted a reaction, and I wasn't giving him one. I eventually just started saying, "Do it, you fucker, slit my throat. Come get me, is that what you want?" with the strangest, most unemotional face I can muster up. At this point, he's getting confused. He's still wielding his knife at me, but it's only 4 to 5 inches from my face. He can't get his arm in my window any further. He's still shouting about how much of a whore I am and how he's gonna kill me and make me pay. I stare at him for a while with no reaction to what he's saying. I think he realized that whatever he wanted to happen wasn't going to. He took his arm out of my window, saying he'd find me, that he was still going to kill me, that he knows where me and my slut mother live, and how he knows how many dicks I've sucked. He walks back to his car and speeds off, hitting a student's car in the process. It took me a few seconds to come back to reality. The girls in the car beside me look at me with a what the fuck look. All the students that arrived when I did stayed in their cars when they realized what was happening. I got out of my car, and so did everyone else. All the students rushed over to me, apologizing, saying that they were too scared to do anything when they saw he had a knife. I didn't blame them, really. That's what I wanted them to do. While this was happening, one of them phoned Tech's principal to tell him what was going on. Tech called the police, and they took my statement. The cops kept asking me if I cut this guy off, brake-checked him, did I know him, etc. I said no, I didn't do anything to him, and I'd never seen him before. Tech had no cameras. I do realize that maybe my reaction was bad. I've had people tell me that I should have just put my Jeep in drive and ran his ass over, or just left the school completely. I think after what I had just went through with my dad, I didn't want to see any more death, even though this guy actually did do something to me. I didn't want him to target other students if I left. I also wasn't allowed to have a weapon myself, being on school grounds, not even a can of mace. Tech ended up letting me go home. A few news outlets wanted to interview me, but I'd just about had enough. They still did run a story without me that night. 2 days passed, and now it's Sunday. The cops call me and say that the other guy turned himself in because he saw the story on the news. It turns out that he was a Vietnam veteran, and when the police went to his house, he had a shrine for the war, a whole room with stuff. We go to the court, and they say that because he's a vet that he had a flashback and was temporarily delusional. He has to complete an ARD program, stay 599 feet away from me at all times, and pay for my scratched window. I'm pretty upset by the verdict. I of course respect veterans to every extent, but you can't be on the road if you're going to do stuff like this to innocent people. I still see him around at the store or the gas station. I'm not sure if he even remembers me or not. Every time he looks at me, but not like he knows me, just how you would glance at any other random person. I feel a bit bad for him. He didn't deserve what the war did to him, but I also didn't deserve what he did to me. I hope that one day he overcomes the trauma like I have. It's made me a paranoid driver that checks the rearview mirror a little too often, and I get scared when someone follows me for too long. I now have a concealed carry permit with a gun, knife, and mace in my car at all times. I'm overcoming it, finally. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, as well as perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a personal story that you'd like to submit, or you'd like to just send me a message, links to all of my social media will be in the description for the video below. This includes my Gmail, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the theme of the story is, if it has any, the name of the story, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious at all about the music used in this video, the music is always listed in the description below, in the order which it appears. I also have links to the artists and list the tracks by name, just in case you want to find more of their work. Last but not least, if you have any criticism, please be sure to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.